Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unraveling the horrifying history of the Frankston serial killer and the current, incredibly high-stakes battle to keep him behind bars. We're looking at a case that didn't just terrify a community, it permanently scarred it. We're going to use the facts, the timelines, and some really intense psychological analysis to figure out exactly who Paul Denyer is, what he did, and why his potential release is causing absolute outrage right now.
So, should a convicted serial killer ever be released from prison? It's a massive ethical and legal question, right? For anyone who believes in the justice system, it's a tough one to wrestle with. But for Victorian authorities, and especially for the locals who actually lived through this terror, this is not just some philosophical debate. It's a very real, incredibly pressing dilemma happening right this second. And to understand why this matters so much to society as a whole, well, we really just need to do the math.
30 years, because exactly 3 decades after committing some of the most, frankly, depraved crimes in Australian history, Paul Denyer is officially eligible for parole. It's been 30 years since he pleaded guilty to these heinous acts. Now, he's actually already applied for his freedom once, and he was rejected. But here's the kicker. Under the current laws, there is absolutely nothing stopping him from trying again and again. Part 1. The Frankston Serial Murders. 7 Weeks of Terror in 1993. Let's flash back to the winter of that year, when a seaside Melbourne suburb found itself under what literally felt like a total lockdown for women. Over a shockingly brief period of just 7 weeks, an unemployed local named Paul Denyer randomly selected and mercilessly slaughtered innocent victims. It all started on a rainy night, June 11th. 18-year-old Elizabeth Stevens had just gotten off a bus, only to be held at gunpoint by Denyer with, get this, a makeshift pistol he'd actually fashioned out of wood. Then, 4 weeks later, another woman narrowly escapes an attack, really only because she fought back and ran for her life. But Denyer was absolutely determined. He needed to kill. So early July, new mother Debbie Frame steps out to a milk bar just 650 meters from her house. She left her 12-day-old baby inside. Denyer was hiding in the back of her unlocked car and abducted her. And finally, on July 30th, 17-year-old Natalie Russell was ambushed while simply taking a shortcut home from school. Now, when asked for a motive, Denyer offered this incredibly blasé, emotionless explanation. He basically admitted he viewed his victims just as meat. I just wanted to kill. That was it. Detectives actually noted he didn't show even the slightest flicker of emotion. I mean, he even carved tic-tac-toe marks, knots and crosses onto Elizabeth's torso post-mortem. There was absolutely zero sexual assault here. It was purely about the horrific thrill of taking a human life. It's honestly like looking into the eyes of a shark. Part 2. Catching the Killer. The Hunt for Pure Evil. You can imagine the immense pressure on the police to stop a man who was killing literally just for the thrill of it. Someone they knew for a fact would strike again the moment he felt that urge. Denyer's final, frenzied attack on Natalie Russell was actually his undoing. See, he had pre-planned this one. He pre-cut holes in a fence along a shortcut path so he could drag his victim away from prying eyes. But he made a massive mistake. A postal worker spotted him slouching suspiciously in a parked car and called the cops. Tragically, while police were on the way, Denyer murdered Natalie. But here is an incredibly chilling detail. As Denyer was walking back to his car, he sees 2 police officers inspecting his vehicle. Cool as can be, he just casually puts his blood-soaked hands right in his pockets, walks straight past the police, waits for them to leave, and then drives home. But that tip from the postal worker, that led police right to his identity. Detectives swooped in immediately, hauling him in for questioning. Just 32 hours after killing Natalie, he's sitting in an interrogation room, and her blood is literally still under his fingernails. During intense questioning, well, actually, during a break away from the main police cameras, Denyer suddenly and gleefully confesses to the detectives. He just comes out and says, "I did the 3 of them. I killed them." Detectives later described that moment as both totally elating and completely exhausting. The hunt was finally over. But you know, the psychological puzzle, that was really just beginning. Part 3. Inside Denyer's Mind. Diagnosing a monster. To really grasp the danger he poses today, we have to look at what exactly is broken inside his psychology.
Denyer was officially diagnosed with sadistic personality disorder. What does that actually mean? It means taking genuine delight in other people's suffering, hurting, tormenting, and torturing others strictly for pleasure. His deadly impulse was driven by this inexplicable loathing of women, which he admitted had him fantasizing about murder since he was just 14 years old. So this wasn't some crime of passion or a momentary lapse in judgment, right? This was a deep-seated pathological drive.
While in prison, though,
things took a really bizarre turn. In 2003, Denyer started identifying as a transgender woman named Paula, claiming the murders were an attempt to destroy his suppressed gender feelings. But here's where it gets interesting. Natalie's brother, Darren, who actually happens to be a leading medical expert in transgender health, found this whole thing completely baffling. He pointed out that for someone who had violently detested and stalked women for years to suddenly claim to be one, and then revert back to identifying as Paul a decade later in 2014, is highly, highly unusual. To a lot of people, it looked like a manipulative strategy with one clear goal: getting transferred to a women's prison. And when that didn't work, Paula vanished, and he went right back to being Paul.
Part 4. The fight to deny parole. A vexing legal loophole. So how exactly did a man sentenced to basically die in prison become eligible for release? Well, that brings us to a deeply disturbing legal reality. While prisoners in Victoria are strictly banned from contacting their victims' families, they are legally permitted to write directly to members of Parliament. Exploiting this loophole, Denyer recently wrote a letter pleading for freedom directly to Victorian MP David Limbrick. The absolute tragedy here? David Limbrick was actually Natalie Russell's boyfriend at the time of her murder. I mean, Denyer had the audacity to write to his victim's former partner, suggesting Limbrick might want to advocate for his release. It is almost unbelievable. In these letters, Denyer insists, "I am not a danger to society," and promises he'll never return to the area. But then you have experts like forensic psychologist Carla Ferrari, who has pored over these documents. She explicitly states there is zero evidence of change. She points out that there is absolutely no treatment for sadistic personality disorder. Even with intensive therapy, any gains would be incredibly modest at best. So, that core risk that existed back in 1993, it remains entirely present today. To wrap up our explainer on this ongoing legal battle, we really need to look at what's happening on the ground right now. Victims' families and politicians are actively fighting for specific, targeted legislation, what's often called a one-man law. These kinds of laws have actually been used before in Australia to permanently block parole for mass shooters and bombers. So the families of Elizabeth, Debbie, and Natalie are campaigning relentlessly right now to ensure this exact same legal barrier is applied to Paul Denyer, essentially making sure he can never, ever legally be released.
As we conclude, I want to leave you with a pretty chilling thought to reflect on. If the experts are right, and the mind that terrorized Frankston all those years ago hasn't changed and fundamentally cannot be cured, what happens if the cage door is finally opened? Does true justice require permanent containment when the threat remains permanent? It's a heavy question that the legal system and the community are being forced to answer right this second. Thank you so much for joining me as we unpack the facts behind this really harrowing case. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.